"Stop him!" The command tore through the emergency room, but 14-year-old Micah Brooks didn't stop. His hands trembled as water ran over the infant's face. The baby doctors had just pronounced dead. In that moment, a homeless boy with nothing proved that sometimes the powerless hold the only power that matters, the refusal to look away when everyone else already has. Before we dive into Kai's incredible journey, I need you to do me a favor. Drop your country or city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story is reaching. And kindly hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is the kind of story that will stay with you long after it ends. Now let me take you back to where it all began. To the streets where Kai learned that being invisible was the only way to survive. Kai, that's what the streets called him, the few times anyone called him anything at all, was 14 years old and made of angles. Sharp elbows, jutting collarbones, cheekbones that cut shadows across his dark skin. His lips were cracked deep enough to bleed when he talked, which he rarely did. His hands were rough as tree bark from sleeping on concrete, from pressing against brick walls behind Mercy General's dumpsters, where the wind couldn't quite reach him. The dumpsters were prime real estate in his world. Other street kids knew it too, which meant Kai woke before dawn every morning, heart already racing, ready to run if someone bigger decided to take his spot. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't fully afford, not when closing both eyes meant waking up robbed, or worse, not waking up at all. His survival routine was precise, honed over 2 years of invisible existence. Wake at 5 a.m., move before security started their rounds. Find a public restroom, the one at the bus station was best, furthest from the hospital where people might recognize him, and wash his face, his hands trying to scrub away the street smell that clung to his skin. He kept himself as clean as possible because dirty drew attention, and attention from the wrong person meant trouble. By 6 a.m., he'd hit the restaurant district, checking dumpsters behind diners and cafeterias. Tuesday mornings, the Italian place tossed perfectly good bread. Thursdays, the sandwich shop threw out day-old bagels. He'd learned which places had cameras, which cooks might chase him, which managers looked the other way. Every meal was a calculation, a small victory against the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. By 7 a.m., he'd be back near the hospital watching, learning which nurses had kind eyes, which ones brought extra food from the cafeteria, and might, if they saw him sitting quiet by the doors, leave a wrapped sandwich on the bench beside him, and which ones called security the moment they spotted him. People looked through Kai like he was made of glass. Their eyes would slide right past him, focus on something, anything else. He'd become an expert at reading that particular kind of blindness. The way pedestrians would quicken their pace, how mothers would pull their children closer, how business people in expensive suits would suddenly find their phones absolutely fascinating. He never begged, never held out his hand or asked for anything. That was his mother's voice in his head from before she got sick, before his baby sister stopped breathing one winter night, before everything fell apart, and Kai ran because staying meant foster care, and he'd heard the stories. Pride was one of the few things he could still afford to keep. In the inner pocket of his jacket, wrapped in plastic bag layers to keep it dry, Kai carried one photograph. His mother smiling, gap-toothed and beautiful, holding baby Zara in her arms while 8-year-old Micah pressed close to her side. It was the only proof he'd ever been someone's son, someone's brother, the only evidence that once someone had looked at him and really seen him. Most days followed the same pattern, but this Tuesday afternoon was different because the rain came sudden and vicious, the kind that soaked through clothes in seconds and turned the world gray and hostile. Kai stood shaking by the hospital's main entrance, water dripping from his hair, running down his back, pooling in his worn sneakers. He wasn't trying to go inside, just trying to stand somewhere the rain wasn't actively drowning him. Through the glass doors he could see them, warm people, clean people, people holding briefcases and shopping bags and coffee cups, things he'd never owned and probably never would. They moved through the bright, heated lobby like it was nothing, like warmth and dryness were their birthright. And Kai stood outside in the rain, invisible as always, watching a world he'd never be part of. Until he saw the room down the hall where doctors were giving up, and everything changed. Inside the emergency room, time moved like honey, thick, slow, suffocating. The machines beeped their steady countdown, each tone marking another second that 8-month-old Benjamin Pierce had left in this world. Tubes snaked from his tiny body, connecting him to equipment that had been breathing for him, living for him, for the past 6 hours. His chest barely rose. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that even the fluorescent lights couldn't hide. Jonathan Pierce knelt beside the hospital bed, one hand gripping the metal rail hard enough to turn his knuckles white. This was a man who had built a tech empire from a garage startup, who commanded boardrooms filled with sharks, who made million-dollar decisions before breakfast without his pulse rising a single beat. Forbes had called him ruthless. The Wall Street Journal said he had ice in his veins. But there was no ice now. Just a father watching his son die, powerless as any beggar on the street. 9 months ago, Jonathan had buried his wife, Rachel. Her name still caught in his throat like broken glass. Childbirth complications. The doctors had used clinical terms, apologetic phrases, but the truth was simpler and more brutal. She'd given her life to bring Benjamin into the world, and now Benjamin was leaving too. Rachel had been so happy when she found out she was pregnant. Jonathan could still see her face, lit up like sunrise, hands already resting on her barely their belly, like she was protecting something precious. Our future, she'd whispered. Our legacy. Benjamin was supposed to be that future. The piece of Rachel that Jonathan got to keep. The second chance to be the father and husband he should have been when she was alive. Before he let work consume him. Before he missed so many dinners and bedtimes and moments that couldn't be bought back. The lead doctor, Dr. Matthews, gray-haired and weary, approached slowly. He'd been checking monitors for the past 10 minutes, his expression growing more resigned with each passing second. Jonathan knew that look. He'd seen it before, 9 months ago, when different doctors had told him there was nothing more they could do for Rachel. Dr. Matthews examined Benjamin one final time, his stethoscope moving across the infant's chest with practiced precision. Then he straightened, and slowly, so slowly it felt like an execution, he peeled off his latex gloves. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce." His voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "We've done everything we can. The brain activity is..." There's no response. His body is shutting down. He paused, glanced at the monitors showing lines that barely moved. Jonathan's knees hit the floor. The sound echoed in the too quiet room. His expensive suit, custom-tailored, worth more than most people's monthly rent, pressed against cold linoleum. None of it mattered. The billions in his bank account couldn't buy one more breath for his son. All the power he'd accumulated, all the influence, all the success, useless. Completely useless. A nurse moved toward the machines, her hand reaching for the power switch. Protocol. They had to make it official, had to let the child go. Outside the room, pressed against the window with rain still dripping from his clothes, Kai watched, invisible as always. No one had noticed him slip inside, find his way to this hallway. He watched the father collapse, watched the doctor turn away, watched the nurse's hand move toward the machine. And then Kai saw it. Benjamin's mouth. Just a twitch, barely a flutter. So small that if you blinked, if you'd already decided the story was over, you'd miss it entirely. But Kai hadn't blinked, and he hadn't looked away. His heart slammed against his ribs. "He's not gone," Kai whispered to the empty hallway. Then louder, his voice cracking, "He's not gone." Kai's heart slammed against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack bone. "He's not gone," he said, but his voice came out as barely a whisper, swallowed by the hum of machines and the weight of grief filling that room. He tried again, louder, the words tearing from his throat. "He's not gone!" A security guard stationed near the nurse's station whipped around. "Kid, you can't be in here." But Kai was already moving, not thinking, not planning, just moving on instinct, on something he couldn't name, some desperate certainty that burned in his chest and told him if he didn't act right now, this second, it would be too late forever. He shoved past the guard's outstretched arm, past the nurse whose hand was still reaching for the machine, and ran straight for the hospital bed. Alarm screamed as he grabbed the rail. Doctors turned, their faces shifting from grief to shock to anger in rapid succession. "Get him out!" Dr. Matthews shouted, lunging forward. But Kai's hands were already on Benjamin, scooping up the infant, whose skin felt too cool, too still. Tubes ripped free. More alarms shrieked their electronic panic. Red lights flashed on monitors. Nurses yelled. Someone grabbed for Kai's jacket and missed. Kai sprinted across the room to the sink, the same sink where doctors scrubbed before surgery, where everything was supposed to be sterile and controlled and orderly. He cradled Benjamin the way he remembered his mother holding baby Zara, back when Kai was 8 and thought he understood how the world worked. Before pneumonia took Zara on a February night so cold, their breath had frozen in the air. Before his mother stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped living, even though her heart kept beating for 6 more months. His hands trembled as he tilted Benjamin forward, angled the tiny head just so. He turned the faucet. Water ran cool over his fingers, over Benjamin's face, over lips that hadn't moved in hours. Not rough, not fast, just enough. Just like his mother had done when Zara was choking that one time, when water had saved her, at least for a little while longer. "In the name of Jesus," Kai whispered, his voice breaking into pieces. "Breathe. Please breathe." The seconds stretched into hours, into lifetimes. The world narrowed to just this: the weight of the infant in his arms, the sound of water running, the shouting that seemed to come from very far away. Jonathan was on his feet now, yelling something Kai couldn't process. Security guards had Kai's arms, trying to pull him back, but he held on. He held on because letting go meant accepting what everyone else had already accepted, and he refused. He refused. Then, a cough. Small, wet, impossible. Water spilled from Benjamin's mouth. Another cough, stronger this time. The infant's body convulsing in Kai's arms. And then a cry. Thin, weak, but unmistakably, impossibly real. The baby they had declared dead was crying. The room went silent except for that sound, that beautiful, terrible, miraculous sound of a child who had been gone, finding his way back. Security guards froze. Doctors stood paralyzed. Jonathan's knees buckled again, but this time not from grief. Benjamin Pierce was alive, and Kai, the invisible boy from the streets, had just shattered every certainty in that room. Chaos erupted like a dam breaking. Doctors rushed forward, their earlier defeat transforming into frantic action. Nurses shouted orders. "Get me a BP reading. Check his airway. Someone call respiratory." Their voices overlapping into a wall of sound. The security guards stood frozen, hands still hovering near Kai's shoulders, unsure whether to arrest this soaking wet kid or let him go. But none of that mattered because Benjamin was crying. Actually crying. The sound no one in that room had thought they'd ever hear again. Medical staff swarmed the sink. Dr. Matthews grabbed Benjamin from Kai's arms with surprising gentleness, his face a mask of disbelief as he felt for a pulse, checked the infant's airway, listened to his breathing. Other doctors crowded close, staring at monitors that suddenly showed numbers climbing where moments ago there had been nothing. "Oxygen levels rising," a nurse said, her voice shaking. 72, 75, 80. "Heartbeats there," another confirmed, stethoscope pressed to Benjamin's tiny chest. "Weak but steady, 40 beats per minute, 50. "This is impossible," someone whispered. They rushed Benjamin back to the bed, moved with practiced efficiency to reconnect tubes, restart machines. But this time was different. Benjamin fought them. His tiny fingers curled and uncurled. His chest rose and fell on its own, shallow but present. His eyes, which had been fixed and dilated minutes ago, moved beneath closed lids. Kai stood dripping in the corner, arms wrapped tight around himself, trying to make himself small. Water pooled at his feet. His breath came in short, panicked gasps. They were going to arrest him. They had to be. He'd violated every rule, caused chaos in a hospital, touched a patient without permission. He'd probably just made everything worse and they'd throw him in jail and Jonathan Pierce walked toward him slowly, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. Up close, Kai looked even younger than 14. Dirt was caked under his fingernails. Old scars marked his forearms, some from falls, some from fights, some from things he'd never talk about. But it was his eyes that stopped Jonathan cold. Dark brown eyes filled with fear so deep it had its own weight. "You saved my son," Jonathan said, his voice completely destroyed, barely held together. Kai's response came out as a whisper. "I just didn't want him to die." Dr. Matthews pulled Jonathan aside, other doctors clustering close. They spoke in urgent, baffled tones, medical terminology mixed with raw confusion. "What that boy did has no medical explanation, Mr. Pierce. There's no protocol for this, but the child is responding. His vitals are stabilizing." They ran scans, CT, EEG, blood work. Benjamin's brain activity had changed. Not healed exactly, but waking. Like something dormant had been shocked back to life. Synapses that had gone quiet were firing again. No one had words for what they were seeing. Meanwhile, Kai sat alone on a chair someone had shoved at him, arms still wrapped around his middle. His stomach growled loud enough that a passing nurse heard it. She disappeared and returned minutes later with a sandwich from the cafeteria, a bag of chips, an apple. Kai stared at the food like it might be a trick. Then he ate the way street kids eat, fast, hunched over, eyes darting around, like someone might snatch it away if he wasn't careful. Like it might vanish if he didn't consume it immediately. Hours passed. The chaos settled into cautious monitoring. Benjamin's condition remained stable. Still critical, still fragile, but alive when he shouldn't be. Jonathan signed papers, spoke with administrators, handled the logistics of impossible things. When the night shift arrived and the emergency room finally quieted, Jonathan found Kai still sitting in that same chair, looking lost. "Where is your family?" Jonathan asked gently, crouching down so they were eye level. Kai looked down at his hands. "My mom died. Pneumonia. My baby sister too, before that." His voice was flat, practiced, like he'd learned to say it without feeling it. "I ran away after. Didn't want foster care." Jonathan swallowed hard, his throat working. He thought of Rachel, of Benjamin, of how close he'd come to losing everything. He looked at this kid who had nothing and had still refused to look away. "You can't go back outside tonight," Jonathan said. "Please, stay." That night, in a hospital room usually reserved for the parents of patients, Kai slept in a clean bed for the first time in 2 years. He kept his shoes on, just in case he needed to run. News spread like wildfire through dry brush. By morning, journalists had descended on Mercy General like locusts. "Miracle baby revived by homeless teen," screamed the headlines. Local news ran the story on loop. Churches called it divine intervention, proof of God's hand moving in mysterious ways. Skeptics flooded online forums demanding medical records, scientific proof, logical explanations for the unexplainable. Inside the hospital, away from the cameras and microphones and endless questions, something quieter unfolded. Every day, Kai sat at Benjamin's bedside. Jonathan had arranged it, a chair pulled close, permission granted despite hospital policy about visitors. Kai didn't know what to do at first, just sat there feeling awkward and out of place among the tubes and monitors. But then he started talking, soft and low, about anything that came to mind. He told Benjamin about stars, about how Orion's belt pointed to Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, about how he'd memorized constellations during sleepless nights on the street because knowing their names made him feel less alone, like he was connected to something ancient and constant. He talked about birds, the pigeons that fought over crumbs, the sparrows that sang at dawn, the hawk he'd seen once circling above the city like it was searching for something it had lost. He described the way rain sounded on metal dumpsters, like drums in some wild orchestra, the way morning light hit windows and turned whole buildings gold, small, useless, beautiful things. And he sang. songs his mother had taught him before she got sick. Lullabies that probably weren't meant for babies in ICU beds, but were all Kai had to give. His voice cracked and wavered, but he sang anyway. Benjamin responded. A finger would curl when Kai spoke. An eye would flutter open, unfocused but there. Small sounds escaped his throat. Not quite cries, not quite words, but something. Nurses began to notice. He's calmer when the boy is here, one mentioned during rounds. Doctors watched in silence, taking notes on clipboards, trying to find medical explanations for what they were seeing. One night in the third week, Benjamin's oxygen levels dropped without warning. Alarms screamed their urgent panic. The medical team rushed in, doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, surrounding the bed in controlled chaos. Kai froze in his chair, terror flooding his veins. Not again, please, not again. Then Benjamin's tiny hand, fingers no bigger than matchsticks, closed around Kai's finger where it rested on the bed rail. The grip was weak but deliberate. Present. Kai held his breath. The medical team worked frantically, adjusting oxygen flow, checking vitals. And slowly, impossibly, the numbers on the monitor began to climb. Oxygen saturation rising, heart rate stabilizing. The alarms quieted one by one. The attending doctor, Dr. Reeves, young and sharp-eyed, stared at the monitor, then at Benjamin's hand wrapped around Kai's finger, then back at the monitor. He stabilizes when the boy is near, she said quietly, like admitting something she couldn't quite believe. No one argued. No one had an explanation. They just accepted it. Months passed. Benjamin learned to swallow on his own. Then to sit up with support. Then to track movement with his eyes. Small victories that the doctors had said might never come. They called it unexplained recovery. Wrote papers about spontaneous neurological improvement, used terms like remarkable and unprecedented. Jonathan called it grace. He watched Kai every single day, watched how the boy who had nothing chose gentleness when he could have chosen bitterness, chose patience when the world had shown him none, chose hope when hope should have been beaten out of him years ago. The decision came not in the heat of gratitude, not in the emotional aftermath of the miracle, but quietly, after months of watching Kai simply be himself. One evening, after Benjamin had fallen asleep and the hospital had settled into its nighttime rhythm, Jonathan pulled Kai aside. I want to adopt you, he said simply, not because of what you did that day, because of who you are, because I see you, Kai, and I don't want to stop seeing you. Kai stared at him, eyes wide, afraid to believe in words that sounded too good to be real. You're not charity, Jonathan continued. You're not a debt I'm repaying. You're, his voice caught. You're the son I didn't know I needed. Please, let me be your father. For the first time since his mother died, Kai let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, he could stop running. The Pierce mansion had 17 rooms. Kai counted them during his first night, unable to sleep despite the soft bed and clean sheets, walking the halls like a ghost trying to understand where he'd landed. 17 rooms for 3 people. Back on the streets, 17 people would fight over a single doorway. Culture shock hit like a freight train with no brakes. Within a week, Kai had stashed food under his bed, granola bars, crackers, apples, bags of chips. He knew the kitchen was always full. He'd seen it, but 2 years of hunger had taught him that always was a lie rich people told themselves. So he hoarded, arranging his supplies in careful rows, checking them each night before sleep like a dragon counting gold. He slept with every light blazing, the lamp on the nightstand, the overhead fixture, even the bathroom light streaming through the cracked door. Too many years of dangerous darkness, of needing to see threats coming, of shadows that held knives and fists and worse things. Jonathan never mentioned the electricity bill. The private school was a different kind of nightmare. Jonathan enrolled him at Westbrook Academy, where tuition cost more than most people's yearly salary, and the students all seemed to speak a language Kai had never learned. Reading came hard when you'd barely attended school for 2 years. The letters swam on the page, rearranging themselves into incomprehensible patterns. Math might as well have been hieroglyphics. Teachers spoke to him slowly, overly articulate, like he was stupid rather than just behind. Their condescension felt like being patted on the head while being told he was a good boy for trying. Students whispered in hallways, their voices carrying more than they thought. "That's the miracle kid. I heard he was basically feral. My dad says he's just a charity case. Did you see his clothes? Even with money, he still looks homeless." Kai flinched at Ray's voices. A teacher calling on someone across the classroom would make him duck his head, muscles tensing for impact. He couldn't focus in crowded rooms. Too many bodies too close. Too many potential threats. Twice in the first month, he had full panic attacks in the bathroom, locked in a stall, trying to remember how to breathe while his heart tried to punch through his ribs. Jonathan hired tutors, patient people who came to the house, who worked at Kai's pace, who never made him feel small for not knowing things. Jonathan himself showed infinite patience, never scolding when Kai struggled, never disappointed when progress came slower than expected. Meanwhile, Benjamin grew stronger. First steps, wobbly and uncertain, arms outstretched for balance. First words, "Dada," and then, miraculously, "Kai." The first time Benjamin called him by name, Kai cried in his room for an hour afterward, overwhelmed by the reality of mattering to someone. Small victories the doctors couldn't explain. Benjamin's motor skills developing ahead of schedule. His cognitive abilities sharp and present. Every checkup brought head-shaking wonder from medical staff who had predicted he'd never walk, never talk, never be more than a breathing body in a bed. But the outside world wouldn't leave them alone. Journalists camped at the estate gates with cameras and questions. Documentary crews called offering money for exclusive interviews. Religious leaders wanted Kai to testify at services, to be living proof of God's power. Scientists wanted to study him, run tests, find the biological explanation for the unexplainable. Online debates raged like wildfires. Miracle or medical fluke? Divine intervention or remarkable coincidence? Faith versus science. Believers versus skeptics. Kai's name became a hashtag, a talking point, a symbol people used to prove whatever they already believed. Jonathan became a wall between Kai and the madness. He hired security. He turned down every interview request, every offer, every demand for access. When a reporter managed to corner Kai outside school, asking intrusive questions about his dead mother, Jonathan pulled him from Westbrook entirely and arranged private tutoring at home. One night, after Kai broke down about feeling like a circus animal on display, Jonathan sat beside him in the darkness of his room, all the lights on as always, and said something Kai needed to hear. "You don't owe the world your pain," Jonathan said firmly. "You don't owe them explanations or performances or proof. You're not a symbol people get to use for their arguments. You're not a miracle worker they can point to when they need evidence." He gripped Kai's shoulder gently. "You're my son. That's all you need to be." 3 years later, life had almost normalized. Kai was 17 now, taller, filled out from regular meals and safety. He'd caught up at school, even started to excel in subjects he'd once struggled with. He'd made a few friends, cautious friendships, but real ones. Benjamin was 6 years old and healthy, running and laughing and arguing about bedtime like any normal kid. The miracle had faded into history, replaced by the mundane rhythms of family life. Then one autumn afternoon at a crosswalk, rain started falling. Heavy, cold, the kind that soaked through clothes in seconds. The smell of wet concrete hit Kai's senses like a fist to the gut. And suddenly he wasn't 17 anymore. He was 14 and shaking behind hospital dumpsters, stomach hollow, lips cracked and bleeding, terrified he wouldn't survive another night. His breath hitched, vision narrowed to a pinpoint, heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape. The world tilted sideways, gravity losing its grip. He dropped to his knees on the wet sidewalk, gasping, drowning in air that wouldn't reach his lungs. People stopped and stared. A few pulled out phones, not to help, just to record. Another spectacle for their feeds. "Kai?" Benjamin's small voice cut through the roaring in his ears. "Kai, look at me." 6-year-old Benjamin knelt in the rain beside him, his clothes getting soaked, his shoes splashing in puddles. This small boy who wasn't supposed to survive, who Kai had pulled back from death's door, now became the anchor. Benjamin pressed his forehead to Kai's, exactly the way Kai had done to him years ago in that hospital room. His small hands found Kai's trembling ones and squeezed with surprising strength. "Breathe," Benjamin whispered, his child's voice steady and sure. "Please, Kai, breathe." He didn't let go. "You're safe. I'm here. You're not alone. Breathe with me." Benjamin inhaled slowly, deliberately, his forehead still pressed to Kai's. Exhaled, inhaled again. Slowly, agonizingly, Kai's lungs remembered how to work. He matched Benjamin's breathing, one painful breath at a time. The roaring in his ears faded. The world stopped spinning. The rain became just rain again. Cold water falling from gray sky. Nothing more. They stayed like that for minutes, kneeling on the sidewalk, foreheads pressed together, while strangers walked around them and the rain kept falling. That night, after Benjamin was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Kai finally broke. He found Jonathan in his study and the words tumbled out like water from a broken dam. 3 years of holding everything inside, suddenly too much to contain. He told Jonathan about the guilt of surviving when his mother and baby sister died, about lying awake wondering why he got to live when they didn't, what made him special enough to deserve breath when they'd been taken, about the fear that he wasn't actually worth this life, this house, this family, that he was still just a street trash playing dress up in nice clothes. He confessed the crushing pressure of being called a miracle when inside he still felt shattered. How people looked at him expecting something divine, something pure, when he was just a scared kid who'd gotten lucky. The terror that Jonathan would wake up one day and realize Kai wasn't special enough to keep, that the miracle had been coincidence, and Kai himself was ordinary, disposable. "I'm afraid," Kai whispered, voice breaking, "that you'll figure out I'm not worth it, that I never was." Jonathan listened without interrupting, his face reflecting pain at every word. When Kai finally ran out of things to say, Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You didn't save Benjamin because you were special, Kai. You saved him because you knew what it meant to be invisible. You acted when everyone else had already decided the story was over. That's not about being chosen or having some divine gift. That's about refusing to look away when looking away would be easier." He leaned forward, holding Kai's gaze. "And that's something you choose every single day, not once. Every day. That's what makes you my son. Not a miracle, a choice." Years later, Kai became a pediatric nurse. Not because of the miracle, not to chase headlines or prove anything. He just knew where he belonged. He worked night shifts at Mercy General, the same hospital where everything had changed. The irony wasn't lost on him, walking those familiar corridors in scrubs instead of soaking wet clothes, carrying a badge instead of fear. But night shifts suited him. Fewer crowds. Quieter halls. Room to breathe. He sat in waiting rooms with parents whose children were fighting for life. He knew that particular species of terror, the way time moved differently when someone you loved was slipping away, the way hope and despair could exist simultaneously in the same breath. He didn't offer empty platitudes or false promises. He just sat with them, present, steady. He talked to kids who couldn't sleep because the machines were too loud, the lights too bright, everything too strange and frightening. He told them about constellations, about the stars that were still up there, even when you couldn't see them through hospital windows. He sang soft songs his mother had taught him a lifetime ago. He made them laugh when he could, and held their hands when laughter wasn't possible, and he noticed things. The small signs others missed, the micro movements that might mean something or might mean nothing but deserved attention either way. A finger twitch, a change in breathing pattern, the subtle shift in a monitor's rhythm that came just before the alarms. When doctors had done everything medical science allowed and prepared to step back, when they'd exhausted protocols and run out of options, sometimes Kai stayed, just a little longer, watching, refusing to look away. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, a child's breathing steadied, a heart rate improved, numbers on monitors climbed when they should have fallen. Families got more time, got to take their children home, got second chances they'd been told weren't coming. Kai never took credit. When attending physicians asked what he'd done, he'd shrug and say he'd just been watching, just keeping the child company. He didn't mention the quiet prayers whispered under his breath, the way he'd learned to see past the machinery to the person underneath, the refusal to accept that any story was over until it was truly over. The other nurses knew, though. They'd request him for the hardest cases, the children everyone had given up on. Get Kai, they'd say. He has a way. But they never called it a gift or a miracle. They called it dedication, presence, the rare quality of actually seeing patients as people rather than problems to solve. He didn't need recognition, didn't want it. This wasn't about miracles or divine intervention or being special. This was about choosing every single shift to see value in life when the world had decided the story was over. About love showing up in the quiet moments, 3 a.m. in a darkened hospital room, holding a frightened child's hand while monitors beep their steady rhythm. No cameras, no headlines, no debates about faith versus science. Just Kai, the boy who'd once been invisible, making sure no one else felt unseen. Sometimes parents would thank him with tears in their eyes, calling him an angel, a godsend, a miracle worker. He'd smile gently and correct them. I'm just a nurse, he'd say. I'm just here. But being there, truly, completely there, turned out to be its own kind of miracle. The kind that happened not once in a dramatic moment, but every day in small, sustained choices to refuse to look away. The kind that healed not just patients, but the healer himself. Benjamin grew up healthy, defying every medical prediction ever made about him. He walked at 13 months, ran by 18. At 8, he joined a soccer team and scored the winning goal in his first tournament. At 12, he argued about homework with the same passion other kids reserve for video games. A normal kid with an extraordinary beginning, living proof that sometimes the impossible just needs someone stubborn enough to refuse to accept it. One afternoon when Benjamin was 15, tall now, voice deepened, on the edge of becoming a man, he found Kai in the kitchen making coffee before his night shift at the hospital. They'd been talking about college applications, about Benjamin's interest in pre-med, about following paths that felt right rather than expected. Then Benjamin asked the question he'd been carrying for years. Do you think I'd still be here if you hadn't walked into that room? Kai paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips. He'd asked himself that same question 1,000 times, usually at 3 a.m. when the hospital was quiet, and his mind wandered to that rainy afternoon that changed everything. The weight of it, being someone's reason for breathing, had once felt crushing. But time and therapy and Jonathan's steady presence had taught him that love was always heavier than one person could carry alone. He smiled gently, setting down his mug. I think love walked in with me that day, he said, not because I was special or chosen or meant to be there, but because I refused to look away when looking away would have been easier. He met Benjamin's eyes, and I think refusing to give up on people, noticing them when the world looks away, that's what changes things. Not just once, every time we choose it. Benjamin nodded slowly, processing this. So you're saying it wasn't really a miracle? I'm saying the miracle wasn't that one moment, Kai clarified. The miracle is every day someone chooses to keep seeing, keep noticing, keep believing that no story is over until it's truly over. That's not supernatural. That's just love refusing to quit. Later that night at Mercy General, Kai made his rounds through the pediatric ward. He checked on a 6-year-old recovering from surgery, told her about Cassiopeia and how the constellation looked like a W in the night sky. He sat with parents in the waiting room while their daughter underwent emergency treatment, didn't offer false hope, just steady presence. He noticed when a toddler's breathing pattern shifted slightly, called the doctor before the monitors alarmed, caught the complication early. Small moments, quiet choices, nothing that would make headlines or inspire debates about faith versus science. But in those moments, in his patient presence, in his refusal to let anyone be invisible, in the life he'd built with Jonathan and Benjamin, in the daily decision to see value in every life regardless of what the world decided it was worth. There, the world healed. Not dramatically, not all at once, not in ways that could be measured or explained or packaged into inspirational stories. Just a little more. One choice at a time. The story ended where it began, with the radical act of seeing what others missed, with refusing to accept that any life didn't matter, that any story was over before it was truly finished. Kai had learned that he didn't need to be a miracle. He just needed to keep choosing every single day to notice the twitch of life when everyone else had stopped looking. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that changed everything. If Kai's journey from invisible street kid to the man who refuses to let anyone else feel unseen touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories. Comment below. Where are you watching from? And what was your favorite moment in this story? Remember, you have the power to be someone's miracle today. Not through supernatural intervention, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to look away when someone needs to be seen. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.